Okay. That's fine. That's
And so he said, I said, well, you're probably right about that, but you know, I'm always telling people why these companies aren't broken. It doesn't make me feel good. He goes, well, just look at one more, my investment. So I went to look at this investment, and John Hummer was on this board. And it was, to make a long story short, I went to visit the company, and they had about 20 customers, but all the customers' installations were blowing up. And since I started my career as a software engineer, at this point in time I could still read source code. I could still write code if it was required. So I said to the VP of engineering, can I see the source code? And he said, no. And I said, you know, your investor sent me here, so no is not the right answer. And he goes, no, you can't see it. And I go, did you lose it? I mean, no wonder the software's blowing up. He goes, well, actually, no. We had 19 different versions of the software, so we never finished the first one.
Right.
And what it was evidence of is it was very, very early still in the software industry. It was very nascent. Really building commercial software was an art, not a science as it is today. Nobody had best practices. In fact, there were just a couple companies like Microsoft that were approaching even $100 million in revenue.
Right.
So I went to that board of directors and I said, look, the sales guy's really running the organization. He says, I need a new version. They start over. So you have 20 wonderful customers. They all have a different set of software. So you're really not a software company. You're a professional services company. And they had an offer for that company to be acquired. They went and told the acquirer the story. The acquirer said, we want them anyway. And John Hummer started stalking me at this point in time.
In their best sense of the word.
Yeah, and John's 6'10", I'm 5'2". And John said, you know, I really want to start a fund focused on software, and I want you to be my partner. What do you say? I said, what I say is no way. I said, this venture stuff is crazy. I said, you know, I've looked at 30 companies now. They're all kind of broken. I don't know why you want to be a venture capitalist. And, I'm just going to take a little time off here, a year or so, do some projects for people, and then maybe start another company. I know it's hard to build companies, but wow, what you do seems even crazy. And he was relentless. For about a year and a half, everywhere I went, John Hummer was stalking me. Someone 6'10" and you're 5'2" is around.
Right, you notice.
And so finally he found out what the gestalt of me was. He said, look, if I do this with someone else, it'll be the first venture firm focused on software, and you won't be part of it. I thought, that's interesting. So he laid down the competitive gauntlet versus do you want to be a venture capitalist? So when we started the firm, it was about mid-87 when I finally said, okay, I'll do this. And then it turned out that no one had actually raised new capital. No one had actually created a new venture firm for 5 years. It was a venture creation drought. There were at the time only 100 venture firms. So I did not know this. I didn't know much about fundraising for a venture firm. So we had to have 133 meetings before the first person said yes.
Wow. Okay.
So
that's a lot of patience, right?
Yeah. If you're very competitive, what I tell entrepreneurs in their own fundraising is that the fundraising process it's very Darwinian. It weeds out the weak and it makes the strong stronger. Because you really believe you have a great idea and you listen carefully to the feedback you're getting. You figure out where your supporters are in the marketplace, and it may take some time, but if it's worth it, you will find the money for your venture.
So I got to ask the question, 133, is that what you said?
Yeah.
So how many times did you pivot along the way, or did you at all? Were you firmly convinced in the story and you were just waiting to find the right person, or did you indeed adjust?
Well, we only had one story.
Okay.
The story was we didn't change the story at all.
Okay.
In fact, we used actually a slide projector with actual slides in it, and hauled around one of those leather cases, the slide projector, and we ran on the slide projectors. We got really good at going to Kinko's, getting spiral bound versions of everything. So we didn't change our pitch at all. We did one important thing. We said, look, we think we have steak, we need sizzle. How are we going to have, a little bit more glitter on this? And we were fortunate that Pitch Johnson, Bill Edwards, and Don Valentine, in the case of both Pitch and Don, Asset Management, and Sequoia Capital, all agreed to each give us $500,000. So we could go back, which is a big thing, to actually take money from your funds, where you're, have a management fee on them, give them to another fund, have management fee on them.
It's very rare.
It's very, very rare. So we went back with a good housekeeping seal. And it was really, really important. We don't know if that made a difference, or we just had ourselves, finally found the right supporters for our fund. But we did, we were after that able to raise the funds, so we owe a lot of gratitude to Pitch Johnson, Bill Edwards, and Don Valentine.
Okay. So we're going to pause for some reason that I'm not clear on.
Because I want to get this angle more so than that one.
Okay.
By the way, that was wonderful.
Yes, that's a great story. I mean,
and Pitch is one of our early nominees.
Pitch was the first. Was he? He was the first one. He was the first winner.
June.
So it was Pitch, de Kramlich, the Drapers.
Yes.
Reed.
And Winblad.
Reed was
I'm all
in
set.
Reed
Reed.
was 2 ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is 5.
I'm all set.
Okay. You don't want, do you want to move that out of the way or not?
No.
You don't need
It's
to.
not in the way.
Okay.
She knows what
Okay.
she's doing.
All right. I guess. Okay.
I figured.
We're just props.
Yes, exactly. I've learned that now.
a bit.
So, okay. So, well, that's a great story. I guess the question that I want, the follow-up question is number 133. Was that someone who had passed before and saw the light, or was it a new, fresh group?
My experience and the advice I give to entrepreneurs is that people don't see the light. There are a lot of factors that go into saying, yes, we were a new fund, so John had some track record to rely on. Mine was only as an entrepreneur. It was a successful track record. It was very good, but I had no track record as an investor. And the limited partner database, the people who fund venture capitalists, had really soured on the venture asset class. If you remember that time, the disk drive industry had collapsed, the semiconductor industry had a challenge, and the software industry was tiny. When we finally closed the fund in 1989, the software industry was only about $35 billion in size. Today, whole sectors of the software industry are that size.
Right. So, wow. Okay, so that's 1989, you closed, you start working, right?
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about how your criteria, what sort of changes you've seen in your criteria, in the kinds of entrepreneurs you're seeing, and the kinds of deals, the structure of sort of picking winners? How has that changed over the years for you and your partnership as you've built Hummer Winblad into a much, much bigger firm than you started?
Well, the high order bits are the same. In order for us to get great returns, we have to fund great people, or people that can attract great people who have an opportunity to seize a very large market opportunity. That hasn't changed. Now, back in our first investment was in a little company called Teammaker.
Oh, yes.
And so our first entrepreneur we funded was a woman. It was Heidi Raisin, renowned in the Valley. And Heidi already had an ongoing business, but she needed capital. So there we didn't see a drawing on a napkin or whatever, and that was a good solid investment. Our second investment was a company in Portland, Oregon called Central Point Software. Again, it had real revenue. It had an outcome as an acquisition. So again, a good, we call these doubles, triples, and singles that make great returns, but they're not 10Xs. Our first 10X investment was in, two of them we made about at the same time, one in PowerSoft and one in a company that became Hyperion.
Okay.
In the case of Hyperion, that was an idea with a very rough prototype, 2 guys, no dog. And in the case of PowerSoft, it was Mitchell Kurtzman's company. Mitchell has been a partner here for 10 years now. And Mitchell was pivoting his company, really pivoting a company that had substantial revenue that was going to go completely away by design and starting over with a client-server development tool product called Power Builder. So today, we rarely see anything as raw as when we saw Arbor Software, which became Hyperion. There was not really seed capital. Many entrepreneurs rubbed sticks together, like I did, to create open systems, performed unnatural acts in any parts of their business.
But all strictly legal.
All strictly legal, as far as they know, to get the companies off the ground, and then had to grow their companies in the beginning part, with their maybe a small amount of family money, and that's it. Today, with the abundance of angel capital and also the real change in tooling for software and the open source, basically all your tools are free that you want to use. I can run them on Amazon's cloud for very little money. I can get quite far in some proof of a product with very little money. Even back in 1990, it took quite a bit of money to get to proof of product. Now, proof of market is another thing, and that still is where money comes in many cases. So the difference is, I'm sorry to see we've pretty much seen the death of the drawing on a napkin. And
as the entry point for a venture.
For a venture. At the same time, the difficulty or challenge, there's a reason we're called venture capitalists versus just capitalists. There's still a lot of art here. We're pattern matchers, that's it. And it requires us, we start at the A round, which means either the companies raise zero money from outsiders, or there may have been an angel round. So it's early. That's the capital V, venture capitalists. We're with the companies for a long time. Back then, a typical exit would be in, roughly 5 years. Now it's more like 9. An acquisition might be in 3 years. Now that's more like 5 or 6. So, the marriages with these companies are much longer. I think that's caused us to have a higher bar on people and a higher bar on, really markets we can claim. So, the start gets easier and more efficient. The gateway to the Series A has lowered a bit, meaning there's still the same amount of Series A, but it's much, much more selective.
So it's more selective, and at the same time, as you're pointing out, it's really easy to start up a software company now, right? So there are a huge number of these companies, right? So back in the day, there were relatively few, compared to today, startup software companies or early stage software companies. Now, pick a sector, any sector, and there are a bunch of teams that are chasing that sector. How do you decide, how do you pick winners in a much more crowded world?
I don't think the world is any more crowded. In fact, I'm surprised at some sectors where there aren't more people addressing them. The number of business plans that we see today seems large, but when I look back, 24 years, it was large as well. Because remember then, a Series A could be an idea.
Right, sure.
And so, we saw a lot of smart people, a lot of teams of 2. In fact, the typical investment we make today is still less than 10 people in the company.
Right.
On average, 5 or 6. So it's not a volume issue. It really still is the big question is, how do you pick winners?
Right.
Now, if I knew the perfect answer to that, we've...
Well, you've done better than most. Okay, so...
Our funds over the last 24 years, and some funds have been better than most, but on average we've generated a 42% IRR, which is pretty good.
That's pretty astounding.
And individually, that varies. So, and we've got great companies that we're working with now, so it's a very, very exciting innovation time. What really changes, Bill, is that it looks like innovation is steady in software. And it really, it spikes and flattens and spikes and flattens.
Right.
During the spike times, it's really exciting. There's lots of deals, lots of entrepreneurs. We're at one of these spike times now.
Okay.
That spike time happens to magically also have happened when micro funds have been created. These are whole funds of very sophisticated, experienced people, such as yourselves, doing very, very early stage deals. We call them seed. And we may someday have the rules of the Job Act written, so, investors, we can expand it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's great when that happens during innovation points, because we want to let a lot of people in. We want to see a lot of experiments. We want hard problems to be addressed. One of the problem sets that's being addressed in this era is really what we call analytics, not just big data, but really hard computer science around machine learning, around decision-making not supported by data, but predicted by data. These are really hard problems. So it's bringing scientists out into this flow as well, not just, I want to build a company.
So talk more about the spikes that are exciting today. So analytics is an exciting spike. Any other exciting spikes that you're seeing?
Well, I think there are whole industries that are being reinvented by software. I love that Mark Andreessen says that software is eating everything. I feel like we're sharing software with everyone versus eating them. So if you think about the U.S. economy...
He's only about 30 years after your thesis, or when I wrote it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Netscape went public in 1995, the same year that Arbor went public. That became Hyperion. So, and that was a bigger IPO than Netscape, I will say.
Important point. Okay.
So, let's look at manufacturing as a sector. That is really turning into computational manufacturing, where the tooling is really important, the software is really important, and the type of people that are being hired into manufacturing are very, very different than were hired for assembly lines before. So that gives the U.S. an opportunity to leap ahead in a whole sector where people are saying, well, where are we in manufacturing? So when you start pairing smart everything, with these various industries, you change the industries as a whole. Look at the transformation in retail. Not just in behavior of consumers with smart devices everywhere, but the ability to have, 360 information for me, the buyer, and for you, the seller. We see the transformation of companies, like Best Buy. We see, what is a brand? How is a new brand change affected? The JCPenney story is a good example there. How we consume media and the whole media industry, that certainly has changed dramatically. If you remember, we were the investors in Napster.
Right.
The first peer-to-peer network. So, you know,
So were you before your time? Were you ahead? What's the right way to look at the Napster investment today?
well, the Napster investment, the right way to look at that is clearly we weren't ahead of our time in how users would consume.
Right.
But market forces have different forms.
Right. Well, the business models weren't there yet, right? To
Well,
navigate that transition.
I think if you look at, you know, how I consume music today, I have, you know, iTunes, Pandora, you know, Pandora?
Yes.
I love Pandora.
We were the first investors in
yeah.
Pandora.
I love Pandora. And I love a lot of things about Pandora, not just how I get my music, but how I tell it what music I want. I have some features I like added to Pandora I'll tell you about
I'll
later.
connect you with Tim.
But realistically, you know, there are incumbents in every market in some shape or form. And those incumbents either are ones that own the budget dollars that you're trying to get, they are selling competing products to consumers, and you know, they want to stop change or embrace it and shift quickly. The former is more often than the latter.
Right.
And in the case of Napster, we, you know, the incumbents were, you know, a pretty challenging bunch.
Right. So, well, let's go back to pattern matching, because I think a lot of people on both the investment side and the entrepreneur side are really trying to figure out, you know, what are the patterns in terms of when you look at a company, you look at a team, you look at technology, you look at a market. You know, over the years, what are the lessons you've learned about, you know, sort of false positives and false negatives when it comes to pattern matching against, you know, a brilliant entrepreneur who turns out not to necessarily be as articulate as you wish, or a brilliant technology that turns out it never gets to market, or, you know. So what sort of lessons have you learned, any scars you're willing to share about, you know, insights you've had over the years?
Well, first of all, it's really hard to build companies from scratch. Having done it myself, and having, you know, played a role in companies that have done it successfully and unsuccessfully, or somewhere between grand successes and unsuccess. You know, and that should not be underestimated. The variables are huge. And most companies do not die from the incumbents trying to kill them. They die from self-inflicted wounds. You know, it's just like, you know, if you have to say, what were you thinking? Don't have to ever ask that question. It's really easy if you love the sector you're investing in. We love software here. We're all out of the software industry. I still really love software. I mean, that's why I get up in the morning. I really find software really interesting. The idea that ones and zeros can make products was a magical thing for me when I was a college student.
Are you still coding in your spare time or not?
No.
You're not?
I could.
Okay,
But,
I'm sure you could.
but I'm not sure how well I could do that.
But you love software,
I don't have
right.
any spare time
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, good point.
So you know, it's easy to be seduced by products. And
Right.
convince yourself that some way, somehow, products can become companies. Now, that's why I love angel investors, because they can be seduced by products. That's what they're supposed to do. You know, and it sort of says, we get to then see the products. So the product seduction could be failure point number one. Ignore that maybe you can't get people to work for the founding team. And even if the founding team does not grow into being the leadership team, they're the team. They are it. They are the ones that have to attract excellence, have to bring the first people in. You play a role, but they're the central cast. So product seduction is one fault. It is really challenging once you're in these companies to know how much patience you should have. You cannot be in a hurry, but you have to have a sense of urgency. That sounds contradictory.
Yes.
You know, it's learn. And, you know, but you can't time markets perfectly. How you should spend your money, the pace of spending money. Almost every single company, even the grandest successes, you say, I wish we hadn't spent that money then, because we'd have a little bit more now. So, you know, it is, the other thing that is a learning is that it is what it is. If you make a mistake, you have to really assess what that is quickly and lean forward. Yeah. I know Cheryl likes to say lean in, I say lean forward.
Okay. And then what do you do when you're closer to the face of the entrepreneur? That's the question. Right? As you lean forward. I'm being partially facetious here, but
yeah, I mean,
you have this entrepreneur who there's a big mistake, right? I mean, for example, I mean that's
well,
something's
usually
wrong.
Not a mistake. It's like
something's going wrong.
It's not going right yet, or we made a bad hire or whatever. John Hummer, I think first articulated this statement, and if you're a 6'10" NBA basketball player, you say this is scary. He said, we and the entrepreneur have to be comfortable standing naked in front of the mirror. And it really requires a lot of intellectual honesty to be both an investor and both an entrepreneur. It just does. Yeah. And it requires intellectual stamina. Yeah. There are some days every entrepreneur is fatigued, and even the investors are fatigued. You just kind of want to cruise. We don't get days to cruise. We have to be on our game. Especially in new markets. We're only building companies. On an A round, we might see some product, but still, we're building a company on a set of assumptions. We don't have facts. In fact, it takes a long time to get facts. And knowing what those assumptions are, a small set of them, makes it easier. When my company was acquired, I was acquired by a company called University Computing Corporation, UCell, which became part of CA. And Greg Lemont was the CEO running it. He was a relatively young guy. And he made me sit down and he said, what are the top 5 assumptions you have that are driving the strategy of your company, Open Systems? Because don't answer me today, come back tomorrow and tell me. I did. First board meeting, I had this big board presentation prepared. And he said, Ann, before you give your presentation, those 5 assumptions that you articulated, can you repeat them? Which I did. He goes, are they still true? And I said, yes, I believe they're true. And he goes, you're done with your presentation. Because I don't need to know anything more. So that was a very key learning for me early in my career, is there's a lot of stuff in the weeds you can talk about. And you kind of have to let entrepreneurs talk about them. Here's my 8th thing on the sales thing. But there are these assumptions about, is market readiness, assumptions about, how will the market value this, how should we price it, assumptions about who really are our competitors and partners are really what shape these companies. And then it really is, can you get the best talents? Can you get great leadership? Can the leadership team work extremely well together? And does every member of that leadership team really have the guts to stand naked in front of the mirror, have the kind of intellectual honesty